Let's talk about it with Caitlin Huey-Burns, national political reporter for Real Clear Politics. Aaron Blake is a senior politics reporter for the Washington Post. Donald Trump put out, the Trump campaign put out an electoral map, Caitlin, and it shows Arizona solidly red. He says he's going to win Arizona and a number of these other states like Georgia that have been sort of heading toward the toss-up category.
Right, but the fact that Arizona is a toss-up race at this point really speaks to the uphill battle that Donald Trump will have getting to 270. If you look at the Real Clear Politics polling averages, and if you look at the electoral map as it stands, Hillary Clinton has already reached that threshold. And then if you add in the states in which she is leading, she already hits well over 270. The problem for Donald Trump right now is he is struggling to get Republicans on board, struggling to win Republican-leaning states. Utah has also been competitive, and Mike Pence will be campaigning there tomorrow, which is a real sign of how the campaign is focused on bringing Republicans home. And meanwhile, Hillary Clinton is really focused on expanding her map, competing in places like North Carolina, where she's been leading in a couple of polls as well. Even if Donald Trump wins Florida, it's still an uphill climb for him.
What about issues like Obamacare, Aaron? We're about to see, notices go out apparently the 1st of November, just before Election Day, that a lot of people are going to be seeing those double-digit price increases in Obamacare, that a lot of people are going to have only one insurer to purchase plans from. Is that the kind of issue that could make a difference in an election like this?
Well, I think it would be a really big issue, and it is a big issue. I do think it would be a bigger issue if Donald Trump were able to keep the race focused on this a little bit better. He certainly tried to this morning, but his comments about the whole thing were kind of odd. He gave conflicting signals about whether his employees were on Obamacare, for instance. I think that this is very much like the WikiLeaks Clinton emails that came out. If Trump can really keep focused on this particular issue, this is something that can really help. I do think, by the way, the presidential race is probably pretty well cemented at this point. Maybe this affects a point or two here or there. I think this is a big thing probably for congressional Republicans as they try to hold on to the Senate and as Democrats have at least some optimism about winning back the House, which I think is still very tough. This is going to be something that's going to be an ad after ad after ad that Democrats voted for the Affordable Care Act, and look what's happening now. And I think that's a very strong argument for them to make going down the stretch here.
Caitlin, what about that? He says a lot of minds are made up. What do you think with 2 weeks to go, 2 weeks from today? People who haven't voted earlier are going to be pulling the levers.
Right. I think it would take a comeback of historic proportions for Donald Trump to be able to defeat Hillary Clinton. I think the goal really and the focus right now is really on those down ballot races, as Aaron mentioned. If Donald Trump can narrow the deficit between himself and Hillary Clinton nationally and in some of these really key battleground states to help some of these down ballot races, I guess the campaign could kind of consider that some kind of a victory. But interestingly enough, the campaign hasn't really been focused on getting support for other Republicans, and kind of picking fights with the establishment and that sort of thing doesn't really help in that effort. And Obamacare is a great example of that, an opportunity, as Aaron mentioned, for Donald Trump to help some of these Republicans get into Congress to make the case that electing them would help to repeal and replace it if that's what they want to do. And he just hasn't really been focused on that.
I want to put up the 2016 electoral scorecard as our Fox News decision desk now sees it. Shows Hillary Clinton with 307 electoral votes right now, either solidly Democratic or leaning Democratic. Donald Trump with only 174, and the trends do not seem to be in his favor. Iowa and a district in Maine that were considered leaning Republican are now considered toss-ups. And even Indiana, Mike Pence's home state, which was in our previous such poll, a solid Republican state, is now only listed as leaning Republican. Aaron, when you look at this map, there's not a lot of good news there for Donald Trump.
No, I mean, the mere fact that we're talking about states like Arizona and Georgia being close to toss-ups, the fact that Texas is somewhat close, if he loses any of those states, this race is over. It's already done. We're also looking at some other red states where we've had some close polls, including, as you mentioned, Indiana, Missouri, Alaska is even polling somewhat close. This race really, it's kind of redone the political map in some ways, but in a lot of ways, it's just kind of shifted it to the right a little bit, and we're seeing a lot of these red states come into play. So, Trump really needs to shift things in a major way these last 2 weeks. It hasn't happened in recorded history, and we'll see if he has something up his sleeve.
Caitlin, everything I have seen in the polling still indicates that the unfavorable ratings of these two candidates are still about where they were. I mean, they're still about even. If that's the case, why is Hillary Clinton doing so much better now in so many of these states than Trump?
It really is remarkable at this point. I think that the challenge for the Hillary Clinton campaign right now is to really continue to enthuse her voters to come out and support her. If they see that this race is, if there's a large deficit in this race and it looks like she's headed for victory, there are questions about, what kind of effect that could have on turnout. So I was at an early voting location earlier today in Cleveland, and a lot of people there were saying that they were voting early and voting now to kind of ensure that that didn't happen. And the Clinton campaign has been really focused in a lot of these states too on the ground effort and really pinpointing and contacting these voters. And that's something that the Donald Trump campaign hasn't been able to really compete with and hasn't really invested that much in competing with that. And that makes a big difference, especially in the last 2 weeks of a presidential campaign.
And tomorrow, when he could be campaigning, he's apparently going to be opening his new hotel in Washington, which has a lot of eyebrows raised. All right. Aaron Blake from the Washington Post, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Real Clear Politics. Thank you both.